So bear with me. So our idea here is we want our policymakers and ecosystem builders to learn experiences that have thrived and worked in Kansas City. So with that in mind, can you tell us about how SourceLink got started and what problem did you see in Kansas City that SourceLink filled?
Sure. So we started KC SourceLink back in 2003. And the problem that we had back then was that there were lots of entrepreneurs and there were lots of resources, but the entrepreneurs couldn't find the resources, and if they found one, they found the wrong resource. And so it was pretty difficult there because the perception of the entrepreneur was that we just didn't have any good resources to support them. And so everybody said, well, we're not an entrepreneurial city. We don't have any resources that support us. Mm-hmm. So Kauffman Foundation gave a small grant to UMKC, the University of Missouri, Kansas City, who I still work for, and said, fix the problem. So I had a little white sheet of paper that said, fix the problem, get entrepreneurs to the right resource at the right time. And what we did was, there were a lot of groups that were pulling entrepreneurs together, but I said, well, let's pull the entrepreneurial support organizations together and find out what they have to say. And so we became the first people probably in America that pulled entrepreneurial support organizations together to create a network as opposed to the entrepreneur. And we knew we could get to the entrepreneur through the organizations because they were all connecting in with them. And so we started with that. And the first thing that we did was we pulled about 50 of them together. They had identified 147 of them at the time, and we pulled 50 of them together in a big room. And we just asked questions like, what are you struggling with? You know, what is it that, what are the challenges that the entrepreneur has? What are the challenges that you have? You know, and what could make it better? So we did that, and then we also got people to sit down and write down on pieces of paper, what are you best at? Because there's all these organizations. Are they all doing the same thing? We didn't know. So what are you best at? So what came out of those first conversations from the entrepreneurial support organizations was, this is what we need. We need people to know we exist. Awareness was a big problem. As a matter of fact, at the time, most of the grants did not allow people to market.
Really?
Yeah, they did not market. So awareness was a big thing. They wanted to make the best client referrals possible, so they wanted to know what each other did. There were a lot of people who had never met each other before, who were part of this group of people that did that. They wanted to get more funding, don't we all? And in order to do that, they realized they needed to know how to better measure return on investment from that. And they wanted to know what the gaps were in the system, because they knew that they wanted to do good work that would really help people, but also they knew the funders put money where the gaps were. And so those were the 5 things that we started with when we built KC SourceLink. And it's really, we're still supporting those 5 things today as we work not only in Kansas City, but around the country.
Mm-hmm. So how did you, as KC SourceLink started, even get messaging out if you weren't allowed to market? I know that's one thing we work a lot on, is promoting SparkYard, but we do market ourselves. So how did KC SourceLink do that?
So there were probably 5 or 6 organizations that actually had marketing people.
Okay.
So the first thing we did is we went and grabbed all of them.
Yeah.
And said, what are we going to do? And I remember being afraid because we had, like, at that point, 70 different groups in the network. They all do different things, and I was afraid the marketing people were going to tell us that we had to just market each one of them individually, right? That they were, But the marketing people said, we need one place that we market, so that people can just go to one place, and as long as you make valid referrals out from that place, it will be much better to market a central point than to market things individually. And so that's when we created kcsourcelink.com and all of that. And then the other beauty of it is social media was barely getting started, back then when we were doing it. But when social media got bigger and broader, then what we were able to do is everybody kind of looked out for each other, and then we would just retweet the stuff, right? And so we, instead of having just one group marketing, we were amplifying the message throughout the whole system by doing that.
And that further creates a cohesion connecting these
Yeah.
ecosystem builders.
Yeah.
That's really neat. So let's talk about the We Create series, like
Okay.
kind of the journey of where did it start and where is it now?
Okay. So we started, oh my gosh, when did we start that thing? Well, 7 or 8 years ago now. And we just wanted to tell the story of entrepreneurship in Kansas City. And so our first We Create series was just, what if we did an annual report on entrepreneurship in Kansas City? What would we measure? What could we put in there? And what could we talk about? So that the community would have information on entrepreneurship and tell a few stories of the entrepreneurs. And so we had looked at different things that we could measure. And we looked at an ecosystem, what does it take for an entrepreneur to grow a business? And we came up with 6 things that we wanted to begin to measure. One was network capital. One was corporate engagement. One was the number of opportunities for commercialization, the opportunity pipeline. Did we have the talent to build the companies that we needed? What did we, how aware were people of Kansas City as an entrepreneurial city? And then do we have the resources we need to build businesses and the technical assistance that we need to build businesses? And so we decided we were going to write a report on that. Well, what are the 6 things that nobody's got any measures for? We'll tell you, capital, corporate engagement, opportunity, all of that. So we're looking at this first one going, let's do some creative pictures of what's going on. But first we have to figure out how to measure, what was really going on. And so the We Create series really became a series of trying to understand how to best measure the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
So we started with just kind of We Create Kansas City, and it was the story of the entrepreneurs and the resources, and then anywhere that we could find information on anything. If people could tell us that people were getting capital, we would measure it. So you look at the very first one, and it's beautiful pictures and a little bit of measurement and all of that. And then as we moved further into the series, we were continuing to develop the ecosystem all the way along. So one of my dreams when I first started KC SourceLink was, how somebody attracts any businesses to town, and it shows up on the front page of the paper. 300 new jobs, coming to Kansas City. And I'm like, our entrepreneurs create way more than 300 jobs, right, every year. So I want that. I want that picture on the front page of the paper that say, entrepreneurs create X jobs. So one of the first things we tried to do was to figure out how many jobs our entrepreneurs really create in Kansas City. And we heard that there was this data set that the Department of Labor's own in both Kansas and Missouri. And we have, in Kansas City, there's a state line down the middle. We have half the population on either side of the state line, and half the commerce is kind of there too. So it took me 14 months, but we got these data sets out of the states. And once we got them, we found out that we could figure out how many people had hired their first employee in the community. So one of the pieces of the series became We Create Jobs. And what we found out was that our first-time employers in Kansas City create about 15,000 jobs a year. It's kind of in that range, right?
Wow.
So on a 5-year period, they're creating about 75,000 jobs, which is 8% of the workforce. That's a lot of jobs, right?
Yeah.
And so when we could start talking about entrepreneurship in the view of jobs, people started listening.
Yeah.
There was a big change. There was a big change in how we had conversations.
Yeah.
So we've done We Create Capital, which are there no good investors or are there no good deals? That's all I ever heard. So we said, no, we're going to figure out what's going on in capital in Kansas City. So we did a series around We Create Capital.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big report on what's here, what could be here, what's the mess up. So we did that one. And then our most recent one launched March 10th of 2020, it was the last in-person event I went to, we create corporate engagement, and so now we're looking at corporate engagement. So, and all of those are available on wecreatekc.com if anybody wants to take a look at what we did. So it's been, it's the evolution, right, of what's going on. And then we said, one year we said, oh, well, we're probably just not gonna do annual report this year. And then the city came and said, where's the report? So, yeah.
Yeah, well, fortunately, we do have a city employee here who's so supportive of
familiar
what we
with
do.
Yeah.
You've been doing it all this time. Why haven't you done it this year?
Yeah.
Very familiar.
Yeah.
Did you find that people cared more when you gave a quantifiable number to entrepreneurship, saying these are the jobs created and that story being shared throughout Kansas City?
Yeah, I think people really sat up and listened, you know, when you could say, wow, did you realize, you know, they're creating at least 8% of the jobs, and that's just looking at 5 years. So in 10 years, you may be creating 50% of jobs. And actually, we know today that the net new jobs, about 60% of the net new jobs in Kansas City are coming from the small businesses in Kansas City. And it's higher across the state of Missouri.
That's incredible.
Right, and so when you start talking about, it is the company less than 5 years old that are creating the jobs, and in Kansas City, that means this number. That's a really different conversation.
Yeah. I remember my very first day working at the Health Science Center, and Cameron told me, well, the reason we care a lot about this, he gave me all these numbers, and kind of, you know, looked at the year, and I was like, okay, this guy. And he's like, well, you know, for every startup, you know, that you create one job, and turns into 2, turns into 3. And I still use this example in explaining to people what we do and why they should care about this. So I don't think he remembers that conversation, but it stuck with me, and I still use kind of like, it's creating jobs. That's why people care.
Well, and I think the pandemic, and we'll talk about this more in my session tomorrow, but the pandemic proved it, right? We got a small business-led recession. It's the first time ever that small businesses have led the recession. And I think people began to understand, oh my gosh, this is our vibrancy, this is our job force, our workforce, this is wealth in homes. I mean, I think it's right in front of people right now.
Absolutely.
It's a very different conversation.
Yeah. Which